Okay, Brady, many months ago now, I think,
Mm, mm.
you got me a little present.
I
You
did.
got me a present that I have with me right now.
Ah.
Listeners can hear it. There's some Foley work for you.
Oh,
Although,
hear the dead trees. Hear
yeah.
the dead trees.
Is it Foley work if I'm using the actual thing? I don't know. Whatever. I'm flipping the pages of a book. This is what you got me. A book called Some 40 Tales from the Afterlives by David Eagleman. And I think this actually came up when we were doing the vote counting. You mentioned this book as an interesting book to read. It's made up of a very large number of very short stories about what might happen to you in the afterlife.
Like only 2 or 3 pages each one.
Yeah, they're very, very short. And you sold it to me on like, oh, I might be interested in this book as a nice little book that you could put by your bedside, just read a couple of pages. And I accepted it graciously, and it sat next to my bed for months, untouched by human hands.
Can I just clarify before you tell me what you did next, whether you've still got it, so you haven't burned it. It's not like a religious book. It's not about what really happens in the afterlife, just in case people think that's what it's about.
Yeah, it's like a fictional book, right? Just some fun speculations.
Yeah, it's like thought experiments. It's just things to get you thinking about life more than death, actually. But yeah, it's not like, this is what will happen in heaven or stuff.
It's not touched by an angel, people.
Yeah.
It's fiction, right? That's excellent clarification. And I was interested in the book because you gave me an interesting description of it. You told me some of the basic premises. And so I accepted the gift graciously, and then I proceeded not to touch it for forever. And sort of half forgot about it, even though it was literally the only thing on the dresser that was mine.
It was more of a prop than a...
Yeah, exactly.
Well, one of the reasons I gave it to you, besides thinking that you would like the contents and I wanted to talk to you about the contents of the book, I mean, I know you don't like paper books, but I actually thought you wouldn't mind this book as an object. It's actually quite an attractive book. It's small and thin and it's sort of black. And I thought if there was ever a book you were going to like the look of and accept into your object light house, it might be this book.
I love that this is something that crosses your mind. You're looking at the book and trying to think, will this be accepted into the Gray household?
It's quite modest, It's not gaudy or colourful and not big and fat. It looks cool. It looks like something you would carry around with you. It looks like a Kindle.
It actually is not much bigger than a Kindle itself. Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
But so it went untouched for a long time. And then finally last night, for some reason, I felt motivated to give it a shot. And I've read through perhaps the first 25%, maybe a third of this book. I have some thoughts, Brady.
I can't wait.
Okay, first of all, we have to talk about the physical paperness of this book. Because
I've got my copy here too, by the way.
Okay, good.
There you go. There's your sound.
There we go. Very nice. I was trying to think. It has been maybe 5 years since I have read a physical book made of paper. It might possibly be longer than that, but I'm pretty confident that it has been 5 years. And I have to say, when I decided like, oh, let me pick this up, let me give this a try, I was kind of thinking like this is going to be a charming experience to read a book. It's like going to ye old medieval town and you're like, oh, look how charming this is. But I gotta say, I find the experience of reading a paper book after years of reading digital books extremely subpar. I did not like it at all. I didn't find it charming in the least. I didn't like the physicalness of the book, and I found it super annoying. This little book, like I'm trying to open up the pages, and the pages are all bent, and so now like I have to try to break the spine of this book to make it all nice and even to look at. Like I'm breaking the physical spine of this thing, but even when I do that, the pages are still bent, so the words are all getting wrapped around. As dumb as it sounds, like the lighting is all uneven on the page. I can't just put it down on the table and read it. I have to have a hand on it all the time, keeping the thing open. I don't like paper books. I don't like them at all. I don't think it's charming. I know people are always like, oh, it's nicer to read a paper book if you can, but I'm coming down very hard on digital books are way better.
It's so funny you should say that, and I know this is almost playing to cliche here, but I've actually been really disappointed lately with the low number of books I've been consuming for the last sort of year or two. I mean, I've done a few audiobooks that I've enjoyed, but I haven't been using my Kindle, and it was beginning to irk me. And we were at the shops a few days ago, And my wife was feeling the same way. She reads a lot more than me, but she was like, I want some books.
Mm-hmm.
And we went into a bookstore and like filled our boots with paper books because we felt like that was the thing to do. And I bought 3 or 4 books and came out with them. And I've been reading one of them for the last 3 or 4 days. And I feel like I've been reborn and it's like wonderful. And I'm like deliberately carving out time to read. And I'm thinking, I'm going to run a bath and read a book in the bath for the next hour because I'm enjoying. And like I'm obsessed with the book and I'm reading it at every opportunity. And it's the paper that's re-engaged me. It's having it as a physical object that's re-engaged me. And I know it's a bit of a laugh because we're different and stuff, but I've had the exact opposite experience. I've got back into paper books for the first time in ages and I'm absolutely loving it.
I totally understand that. Like I completely understand that feeling. I do keep a book list of the books that I read, and I don't think that audiobooks count as reading a book in the same way. And I am really aware of the number of books that I have sat down and physically read as opposed to listened to is smaller than I would like it over the past years. And this is something I've been working on since the summer to try to increase the number of books that I read. There's a few things that I've been doing towards that. I can say like paper is not the answer. But what I think paper does do is it's the isolation of the thing. You have a physical book. This is the only thing in your hand. It's not going to beep at you. It's not going to distract you with something else. It's not even that you're sitting there and you have the option of doing something else. It's that isolation. And so I do think it is quite reasonable to get paper books if you want to try to read more books. I'm glad that that's working for you. But I have to say, I felt totally repulsed by the physicalness of this book.
There you go. That aside, the information did communicate to your brain nonetheless.
That's true. I was able to read it. That is entirely true.
What have you thought of what you've read?
Okay, so you sold me on this book with 2 interesting stories that I do want to talk about. But for the most part, reading through this book, I feel like I need to be high while I'm reading this book. I think just sitting down and reading this book, each of these 1-2 page little stories, I wrote down my summary of the first 7 or so that I read. And each of them, here are the summaries. It's, whoa, dude, what if we're like bacteria living on a giant creature that doesn't know we exist? Whoa, dude, what if we're just background characters in somebody else's dream? Whoa, dude, what if heaven is really boring? Whoa, dude, what if our creators are really dumb? Like, you sold me on some great ideas, but man, I have never read anything that I feel like I need to be high and a sophomore in college, and I will love this book. Like, if you're listening to my voice right now, and you are a sophomore in college, and you are high, you should get this book. Like, buy it immediately. You will love it. I mean that in a genuine way. Like, I think the book can be fun, but most of these little stories I found uninteresting.
Anything sounds stupid, by the way, when you say whoa, dude, in front of it. Like, what was Rogue One like? Whoa, dude, what if the plans to the Death Star were stolen by, like, a girl who was the daughter of the guy who designed the Death Star? Whoa. Like, I can make anything sound stupid by talking like a stoner. So.
Oh, yeah. No.
Yeah.
I totally understand, right? But what I am conveying with the whoa, dude, the tone that it felt like some of these stories were written.
They're all supposed to blow your mind a little bit because the idea is each story makes you look at things in a different way. And some of them, I can't remember them. It's so long ago since I read. But most of them, I was like, I really want to tell someone about that idea. The book reminds me of like, true, when you're younger and you sit around thinking, imagine this is an idea, and you don't have to like pursue the idea much further. And that's what this book is. It's like, imagine if the afterlife was like this. But the thing about them is a lot of them make me look at my life differently. You know, it's not like life changing or like getting things done or something. It's like, yeah, I never thought about things that way. And I don't know, it didn't change my life. I'd forgotten most of the stories, but reading a couple of them again today, I had the same feeling. It excited me, and it's very easy to get through because it's so short. It's like digestible. It's like intellectual bubblegum.
I would say I think they're a little bit too short.
Yeah.
Because I do think that like they can't quite follow entirely through on some of their interesting premises.
That's what it is. It's a book of interesting premises.
Yeah, that is totally fair. That's totally fair. But that said, so I'm like a third of the way through the book.
Yeah.
it's such a fast read because it only took me about a half an hour to get a third of the way through.
Yeah.
It's not even like, oh, this one isn't interesting, I don't like it. You're not like investing a whole bunch of time.
Yeah.
Of the ones I did read, I did think that there were two that were interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The first one, which I think does hit that bullet point of making you think about your own life a little bit differently. The first one is actually the very first one in the book, which is called Some.
Yeah, so the one that gave the book its name as well. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the premise of this one is that in the afterlife, you live your whole life again, but you are living all of the similar experiences in order. So you spend 18 months waiting in line, right? 2 years staring out a bus window. You spend a third of your life just asleep all at once.
All the pain as well. All your pain is concentrated into like 8 or 9 hours of just incredible pain and breaking your arm and all that stuff. But then after that, there's no pain at all. Like everything is just concentrated together. Yeah.
The personal one that I like the best, I think related most to Hello Internet, is 3 days calculating restaurant tips, which would be a particular kind of hell. I like that as a premise because you see these lists of how much time do you spend in your life doing various activities. But I think it hits home under this framing of what if you had to live your whole life again, but you're living all of these moments, all these similar moments together. That makes it a much more visceral and interesting thing to think about. What does your life look like?
You spend 2 days tying your shoelaces, 3 days calculating restaurant tips, like you said, 51 days deciding what to wear, 9 days pretending you know what is being talked about, 2 weeks counting money, things like that.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's an interesting way, and like it just makes you think for a moment a little bit differently about how you are living your life.
It's interesting though, because the end of the story, I think, sort of, like it's only a page and a half long, but at the end, it sort of says something along the lines of, this experience makes you really appreciate how your lives are broken up into pieces and all shuffled around. And you don't have to do all these things together, and the variety and the change. But that's not what I took from the story. I didn't take from the story an appreciation for that. I took from it, gosh, am I spending that much time doing things that I shouldn't be doing? If I'm spending 8 days staring into a refrigerator, like, I need to spend less time staring into refrigerators, and you're spending all this time. I'd hate to have to spend all the time I spend faffing around with designing websites or doing some animation and that. If that was all concentrated into 2.5 years of sitting there animating text on videos, I'd be like,
oh God,
should I really be spending that much of my life? Like, when I come to the end, am I going to be glad I spent 9 years animating videos?
I don't know. It sounds like it's throwing your whole life into doubt, Brady.
Well, that's what this book does, like loads of them. And then you read the next one, you forget the one that came before. But like after each story, I'd put the book down and go, whoa, dude. And I'd like turn to my wife or something and say, oh man, imagine this. And then it's like, oh, I'm going to read another one. I think it's really good. I really like it. What's the other one you liked?
Well, yeah, I mean, just to be clear, I'm going to finish the book. I'm going to keep reading through it because it's so short.
Yeah.
And they're all so easy. Like for me personally, the hit rate was quite low of the ones that I was reading, of which ones do I like and which ones do I not like.
I can't remember what my hit rate was like. I thought it was better than 50% for me.
But here's the thing. Making it short, huge advantage.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, oh, if there's an interesting idea, there's a thing that I'll think about for a while. And if it's one that I find uninteresting, I can just move right on past it.
Yeah.
But the one that I like the best so far is one called Metamorphosis. I think this is a really interesting idea. The premise of this afterlife is that when people die, they don't immediately go to the real afterlife. They have to sit around in a lobby waiting. And what they're waiting for is for the last person on earth who remembers them to also die.
Yeah.
And when they are no longer remembered on earth, they are allowed to leave this lobby and move on to the next unspecified phase of what the afterlife is.
Yeah.
And this is a perfect example of I find that a really interesting premise because it brings up this notion of how interesting it is that some people are remembered such an incredibly long time. And you can imagine that there are people who are remembered now who may well be remembered for as long as the human species exists in any form. And then on the flip side, there are, of course, people who are forgotten essentially as soon as they're dead, right? People who are known by almost nobody in the world.
Yeah.
And I like that this premise sort of reverses that. Like the humans who are of great acclaim or are noteworthy on Earth have to spend this interminable amount of time in purgatory, begging, crying, waiting to be
Yeah.
forgotten. Whereas the nobodies get to just pass right on through the lobby and move on to the next phase immediately.
Just to clarify that further, though, it's not just like sort of remembered by people who knew you. It could just be spoken of. In this short
Right.
story, for example, there's some nobody old farmer who was unlucky to drown in a river, which then became like a famous place. And like tour guides go there all the time and tell the story of the farmer that drowned in the river.
Right.
So even though he died hundreds and hundreds of years ago and he was quite an obscure farmer, he's forever stuck in this purgatory.
Right.
Because his story's being told forever and ever. And it's always been changed as well. And in many ways, the story doesn't represent who he is or what he was. But because of it, he's still stuck in this terrible place.
Yeah. There's a line that's related to that, which I really quite liked, where it says and that's the curse of this lobby. We live in the heads of those who remember us, and we lose control of our lives and become who they think we are.
Yeah.
It's a great little line, even just in a very small way, being a person on the internet who says things like you just become so aware of how like the version of you that is in other people's heads has almost nothing to do with the real you.
Oh, yeah.
It's very funny to see people like arguing about like what you think and writing a thing that's like, I don't agree with that at all, right? But you're just laying it out there like this is a thing that I agree with. And I think that it's also just an interesting thing to think about, people throughout history, obviously they just become ideas that are totally unrelated to the actual person.
Yeah.
When you think about Abraham Lincoln, the idea of what you think Lincoln is in your head, probably the real Abraham Lincoln would find almost entirely unrelated to his experience of his actual life.
Yeah. And the book talks about this purgatory waiting room place having like saints and people in there who are revered, and the saints are there who actually were really complicated people who had really complicated lives, and they're just being remembered in a different way. We're making it sound like an epic story. Again, it was only like a page or two, wasn't it? But
yeah, it's literally 2 pages.
The thing that I found really bittersweet and interesting about it as well was the idea that in many cases, the moment you're summoned away and taken away is when some family member dies back on Earth, and they arrive in like this waiting room as you leave, so you never get to see them, because it's the tragedy that you don't get to spend time with them, because the minute they die, that's the last person who remembers you. You're off through the door and they walk in the other door a few seconds later, and people there observing it sort of remark on the tragedy of that. Like, he didn't get to see his grandson because the grandson was the last person who remembered him. So
of course, the question that this begs, Brady, how long do you think we would have to spend in that lobby? How long do you think the Hello Internet podcast will be remembered in human history?
I mean, I don't think very long, and the same with the YouTube videos. I mean, there's just so much content in the world now that I think everything's just going to get buried. The danger is that some researcher in 300 years is going through some archive of something and stumbles over your name, which is around the place, if any internetiness survives, and they might go, oh, CGP Grey, why is someone on this website talking about someone called CGP Grey? I must look at who he is. And if that's hundreds of years ahead for some reason, that sticks you in the waiting room for a pretty unlucky reason. So I guess because we're a bit splattered around the place online, there is a risk that we could come up in a few hundred years on some random search, but I don't think we're going to be like particularly remembered or talked about. So it depends on that. That would be our problem.
Guess we'll find out when we're hanging out in that lobby.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to emphasize again, this book is not suggesting this is what the afterlife is like. It's just a whole bunch of thoughts, like, interesting made up stories.
Yeah. It's just a bunch of thought experiments.
Yeah.
So.
They're conversation starters. I'd have a look. Just two of them, and we could talk about this for hours. I love it.
Well, this is as far as I have gotten, but I just wanted to thank you on the podcast for giving me this gift of a physically inconvenient book. But I will meander my way through the rest of it eventually, and perhaps we'll talk about some of them in the future.
All right. Well, we've spoiled two of them, but I don't really think this is a spoiler type book, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I would categorize this as not spoilers.
Yeah.
They're just ideas.
Yeah.
The idea is the whole thing.
Exactly. And telling a few of these stories is actually how you sell the book to people.
Yeah, you told me about the lobby one, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, give me a copy of this. And I was just as happy to read the lobby one when I actually got to it. The premise is in the first sentence of all of them.
Yeah. Do you want me to tell you the one that was sold to me by a friend of both of ours, actually, called Jake?
Mm-hmm.
And he sold it to me with a different story.
Mm-hmm.
He sold it to me with one, I don't know if you've got to this one yet, that basically there are these like beings. I'm going to make up these numbers because I read the story so long ago. There's like these 2,000-mile tall beings, and their job over thousands and thousands of years, which is this incredibly important high-stakes job, is to hold the fabric of the universe together. Like it's this really labor-intensive, mentally intensive job, keeping the universe held together in the depths of space, or some crap like that. But they get a holiday, they get a vacation from it every 500 years or 1,000 years, and that holiday is to spend 80 years on Earth as a human. So what we are is just the vacation of these beings that have this incredible job. And we think like our lives are really important and we stress about all these things. But for them, just coming and having our little concerns and of our life and worrying about taxes and our jobs and going to the beach and having families is like the ultimate luxury to them. It's like just this flippant little fun holiday they get to go on before they have to go back to their serious job of holding the universe together. So we're just vacationing mega aliens. I love it.
I have a bit of a visceral reaction to that one because I have known people who believe something sort of similar to that.
No, okay, yeah. I mean, it's silly. Yeah, it's silly.
If you follow that one to its logical conclusion, it ends in anger.
I mean, it's written just to be fun. It's not, but I like the idea that our lives are unimportant because we think our lives are so important.
Well, of course, our lives are unimportant. Yeah,
your life is important, Gray.
But I don't think my life is important.
You've got 2 or 3 really important videos to make this year.
It's true. True.